Hi, Catherine.
Hi, how's it going?
Hey, so great to get connected to you.
Great to see you. How you doing?
Good. Well, I'm so excited to tell your story. How about we start by you sharing a little bit about who you are and where you live and what you do?
Sure. I'm Catherine and I'm 34 and I live in London and I'm a co-founder of ELANZA Wellness.
Great. You want to tell us a little bit about the history of what inspired you to create ELANZA Wellness?
Yeah, so my co-founder and I both froze our eggs, and then after the process, we got chatting with a whole bunch of doctors and people in the space, and we decided that we could make a resource for other women in our shoes. And that ended up being a book, which is called Everything Egg Freezing. And, that took us on a journey, really, of talking to a whole bunch of clinicians or women who'd frozen their eggs, and people who, like us, felt really compelled to try and make the process smoother, more effective, and less isolating for other women going through it. And after that process, ELANZA formed, which is basically now making digital tools to further that goal. So we have...
That's so neat. Very cool. Well, let's dive into your personal story and exactly like why you decided to freeze your eggs. How old were you when you really learned about egg freezing?
Yeah, so I was about 31 when I started learning about it, and that's because I was going through a huge breakup. And I'd been in a relationship all throughout my 20s and had always assumed that that's the person that was going to be the father of my children. And I ended up freezing my eggs at 32 right after the breakup. And even though it was a really tough time, in a way, I'm quite grateful for it, because I think having, one big clear event that precipitates looking into egg freezing can sometimes mean that you get around to it a bit earlier. Because a lot of things that we hear from doctors are that, women might kind of start thinking about it in their early 30s if they're not in a relationship, or if they haven't found the person that they want to start a family with, if it's important for them to do it in a partnership. But, life gets in the way. It's an expensive thing, and one year leads to another, and you just kind of think, well, do I really need to do it? Maybe I'll meet someone. And actually, they say that the vast majority of women at the moment don't end up getting around to it until their late 30s. And, there's still value in doing it then, absolutely. But as with natural fertility, the fact remains that the earlier you do it, the more likely it is to give you a better shot at biological parenthood in the future if you need to use those eggs. So, yeah, I kind of count myself lucky in the sense that I had this, big, horrendous emotional episode in my life that really caused me to take a close practical look at everything. And as part of my grieving process, my healing process, me looking forward and seeing what life would become.
So let's talk a little bit about okay, so you were learning about egg freezing, you decided to do it. Where did you pick your clinic? How did you go about that entire process? And tell us a little bit about your journey healing from that breakup and then deciding to freeze your eggs.
Yeah, so I'm British. I'm living in London now. But at the time, I was kind of 1 foot in South Africa, where I'd previously been living in Cape Town, and 1 foot in the UK. And so I checked out clinics in both places, and in the end, I actually decided to go for freezing my eggs in South Africa, in Cape Town. And, talking bluntly, it's just because it was like a third of the price of doing it in the UK, and yet their healthcare system is parable, in my view. They've got fantastic facilities, great doctors, and I met with a couple of friends of friends who'd had their eggs frozen there and had great experiences. So for me, because I already knew the place, and you know, it wasn't this unknown quantity. It actually boiled down to cost. And I mean, it's a real consideration, isn't it? Because it's not insignificant. And, you know, it's an investment in your future. So in my opinion, it's smarter than buying, you know, a fancy handbag or, you know, taking an extra foreign vacation in a particular year. But, you know, the costs are real and they're not insignificant. Yeah,
absolutely. So we also have to address that, like, you had the advantage of freezing in Cape Town and skipping out on the UK storage laws that are very prevalent as well. And I know you froze around 32, but how many years ago was that? That was just like, what, a couple years ago? Yeah, no, but it goes by fast.
Yeah, it goes pretty fast, and it's not unrealistic to think, maybe not for a first child, but if I was needing to use my eggs for a second or third child, that in my early 40s, had I frozen in the UK, the law's changing now a little, hopefully. But at the time there was a 10-year maximum on egg storage in the UK, which was totally arbitrary, and there's a big campaign going on to change that law because there's no scientific basis for it. I think they had the law there in the first place to attempt to protect people back when this was quite a novel procedure, and they just didn't know what happened to eggs after
and I think also too it had something to do with an excess of storage of gamete material that they were worried would fill up the fertility clinic banks, and then people would forget about using them or ever come back for them. So hopefully that campaign will be successful and Parliament will vote to change those laws, because you're right, they are pretty unscientific based, and we know now that eggs can be frozen indefinitely and have the possibility of working based on the science and the data. So that's great.
Extend the limit.
Yeah, extend the limit. Absolutely. Well, so through your journey, how did you feel while you were, you know, going through the egg freezing process and you were taking the injections and getting the hormones and all of that, like during the 2-week cycle? How did you feel?
Yeah, for the most part, I feel like compared to some women's stories, I think I kind of got off a bit lightly. The one thing I would say is if anyone is doing it after a breakup, which is pretty common, and you are maybe still dealing with a lot of stuff emotionally, then for me, the physical side of it was fine, but I got a little bit emotionally blindsided. It kind of, it brought up a lot of big questions for me, like, how did I end up here? And, you know, all that kind of stuff where, you know, eventually when you frame it in the right way, you end up feeling pretty empowered by it. But I think sometimes the mix of the hormones and all the emotional stuff that you might be going through, that's one to watch out for sure. So make sure you have a great support network around you, or, you know, be it a friend or a family member, just somebody who is on call to look after you and bring you snacks and stuff. But physically, I was totally fine. And
did you have a lot of bloating or fatigue?
Yeah, a bit of fatigue. I was kind of okay doing the injections and it wasn't too bad, except for after I'd administered the trigger shot. So I woke up the morning after administering that, and oh my word, the bloating. It's like, it
intense.
Was just so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Really, really uncomfortable. Like that kind of, it wasn't pain. It was just discomfort on the level where you can't stop thinking about it. And at that point, I just got really over it. And I just kept thinking, I want these eggs out of me right now. Like, weirdly, slightly uncomfortably, it kind of reminds me of some friends who've got to that point where they're pregnant and they're overdue.
Yeah.
And like, enough already. I just want to go into labor.
Right.
It was kind of
that scenario. Yeah. Yeah, I felt the same way. That's interesting. Well, how many eggs did you get on retrieval day?
So I ended up getting 13 eggs, and then they froze 12 because
Fantastic.
The 13th wasn't deemed sort of good enough quality to freeze.
Yeah, they have to be a mature level too. Yeah.
And so it's kind of an interesting thing because my doctor at the clinic I was at was relatively conservative. So he said, after the scans and deciding what sort of protocol to administer, which hormone drugs to give, he said, we're going to be aiming for around 12.
Cool.
So he pretty much nailed it.
Yeah.
That's kind of, obviously in my mind, I was like, why? Let's aim for 25.
Yeah.
But, it's one of those realistic things where it's based on your blood tests and your scans, how many they think your ovaries are going to be able to produce safely. But also, there is this little bit of a quality quantity weighing up that goes on. And I think some studies have shown that it's not always a case of just going for as many eggs as possible, because, it's a big process for your body to mature eggs. And there's a kind of, there's a point at which scientists say once you go over a certain number of eggs from one retrieval, then the quality of those eggs might start to be compromised. So yeah, I was pretty happy with that. But over time, it has left me thinking maybe I wanted to do another cycle, because I'd feel a lot more comfortable with over 20. Store.
That makes perfect sense. I did multiple rounds too, because I just wanted to be comfortable with the egg math and numbers and all of the details that followed. But it's really interesting, because I think, at times we get hung up on the numbers, but there is a quality versus quantity factor too. So that's a really good point. I also think this is a good opportunity to talk to your doctor about your number math and what you want to get to, and how aggressive you want to be with the hormones, because that can greatly impact your outcome as well. So those are good discussions to have up front before you start your hormone treatments, and then follow your cycle along and make sure that it's progressing as you both see fit. So it could be a collaborative discussion, which I think some patients maybe weren't thinking of before, because they just took their doctor's advice and maybe didn't have these conversations, and now we can be a little bit more involved.
Totally, exactly to your point. For me at the time, prior to doing all the research and writing the book and interviewing and developing ELANZA Wellness, I very much felt like the patient sitting at one side of the table being told. And, I didn't sort of see it as within my
scope.
Remit. Yeah, exactly, to engage in a discussion about it. But actually that's something I wish I had done. And now knowing a lot more and going for it a second time, I definitely would do that. I'd be more of an active participant in the process and ask a lot more questions about, the subtleties of treatment. Or let's say if someone who went through it and they had a different medication protocol, it's totally fair enough to ask your doctor, why would that be? Why have you chosen
playing devil's advocate a little bit, and or being your own advocate and kind of getting involved in your healthcare. It's great.
Yeah, definitely.
So how did you go about financing or planning for the payment of an expensive procedure, an elective procedure like this? Did you have a savings account? Did you get help from family or friends? Was this like your parents stepped in? Did you have savings? Your job paid for it? What was the money factor for you?
So I actually paid for it out of savings, but that was pretty much only possible because it was in South Africa, and it was the equivalent of it's a little more expensive now, and obviously it completely depends on the exchange rate at the time of doing it, but it was less than $3,000.
Wow,
so
it's amazing.
Very manageable. Yeah. But interestingly, while I was getting ready to do the procedure, my parents were really pro it, and they stepped in and they said, look, do you need help here? Because we see this as our future grandchildren.
Oh, it's amazing.
Help us know. So yeah, I do think that parents, depending completely on their situation, obviously, can get it more than you think they might. And it's family building, or trying to secure family building at the end of the day, and that's something that doesn't just affect us as individuals. It affects everyone: grandparents, uncles, aunts.
Yeah, no, it is really a family affair, and it's interesting how the family members are now viewing it as a way to be proactive about your fertility. And it's amazing that we grew up in this time and that we were able to take advantage of a technology like this, because it's really a game changer for women.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
so, at least. Well, what's some of the best advice you would give women that are debating egg freezing and not sure if it's right for them?
I would say start not even necessarily by thinking egg freezing or not egg freezing, because then it feels quite binary and quite kind of intimidating as a starting point. I would almost say map out, steps over the next, depending on your age, 5 years or 10 years, and see what realistically your life plan looks like and match that with your goals. So I know that for me, having the option of having biological children is really, really important. And so it was always going to be worth it for me to pursue egg freezing. And I want 2 or 3 children. So let's say, and I didn't want to be in a rush to meet somebody after the breakup. So I was kind of looking at it practically as, okay, if I'm 32 now and I don't do this, I don't want to have to meet someone straight away. But let's say I meet someone at 34 or 35, it'll take a couple of years to know that that's definitely the person that I want to start a family with. So by then I could be 37, and that's okay for trying to conceive the first child, but I know I want 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So, then you're kind of getting to the point where it might be a lot more difficult to conceive, or you might have a high rate of miscarriage. So, yeah, for me, it was about mapping out my own path and what it was I wanted, and asking some questions that maybe I'd never really sat with before. So, for instance, like, how do I feel about adoption, or how would I feel about a donor egg? And it feels kind of weird in your early 30s when,
to think of all the possibilities of being a parent.
Yeah, and you're not actively trying to conceive.
Yeah. It's definitely different than an infertility patient that's trying to seek fertility help.
Yeah, it's a totally different thing, because that's like, your path, and that your one clear target is to conceive a baby ASAP. Whereas with egg freezing, it's way more nuanced, and everyone's path and everyone's journey, and what brought everyone to that point is pretty different.
Yeah.
So I don't view it as like an either or with things like adoption necessarily in that decision making process. I think for me, it just always felt like a slightly distinct thing. If I was in a position where I was looking at adoption, that would be because I was choosing to be an adoptive mother.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think I ever wanted to be in a position where I felt like the choice not to be a biological mother wasn't my own to make.
Yeah. Or you don't know, maybe you'd be with a partner that already has children, and you'd also be a stepmom as well, and then maybe add to that kid load in the future. I mean, that's always a possibility too. You just don't know who or how the paths are going to cross and what your outcome is going to be until it happens. And that's the hard part, is because a lot of the fertility doctors, even with your AMH tests and your antral follicle tests, until you try to get pregnant actively, we don't really know the chances and likelihood of that happening. So, this is a really great discussion. I think you have some very great key points that you brought up today, and I'm just so glad that you're willing to share your story, and you've created all these resources for women online to be more proactive about their health. And so just want to thank you for all of that hard work. I know it's a lot to manage.
Yeah, you're doing amazing stuff, Valerie, and I think it's one of the most important things, and it was for me, certainly, hearing other women's stories. So I think the work you're doing, getting them out there, is amazing. So thanks so much.
This has been such a fun chat. Thanks so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. Thanks.
Okay, have a great day. Bye.
Bye.